All right, ready for a deep dive? We're going to get into something pretty interesting today. Something you probably don't think about too much, animal pee. Well, maybe not just pee, but all the fascinating ways that creatures get rid of waste.
That's right. We're talking about excretion.
Yeah.
Not the most glamorous topic, I'll admit, but super vital for life.
Right. Imagine if we just, couldn't get rid of all the byproducts of our metabolism.
Yeah, buildup of toxins, no thanks.
Hard pass. But you're right. It's essential. And in this deep dive, we're going to zero in on one particular type of waste, nitrogen. The nitrogenous waste that comes from breaking down proteins.
And you'd be surprised by how much variation there is in the way different animals deal with that nitrogenous waste. We'll be looking at everything from simple diffusion in tiny creatures to the super intricate filtration systems like kidneys and more complex animals.
Oh, I'm already picturing microscopic tubes and filters. Speaking of kidneys, here's something that kind of blew my mind. Did you know your kidneys filter enough fluid in a day to fill a bathtub?
It's true. It's about 180 liters of filtrate every single day. Think about it. That's your entire blood volume getting filtered multiple times every hour.
Wow. That's some serious processing power.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this incredible filtration system actually work? What's going on in there?
Well, it all begins with these tiny bundles of capillaries in the kidneys called glomeruli.
Glomeruli.
Yeah, and they're like super fine sieves. They use blood pressure to force just about everything, except for proteins, through their walls. And all that goes into the renal tubules. It's called ultrafiltration.
Okay, so we've got this filtrate entering the renal tubules. What happens next? Is that where the waste gets sorted out?
Exactly. The renal tubules, that's where the magic happens. It's kind of like a sophisticated recycling plant, but also a waste disposal system, all in one. So valuable substances, things like water and glucose, they get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And meanwhile, the waste products, those get concentrated.
So it's not just about getting rid of stuff. It's also about reclaiming what's still useful. Now, I've heard about this loop of Henle in the kidneys. What's its role in all of this?
The loop of Henle. This is where things get really interesting. It's this U-shaped section of the tubule that dips down into the inner part of the kidney. And it works kind of like a countercurrent heat exchanger.
Wait, a heat exchanger? Are my kidneys generating heat?
No fire in there. But the principle's the same. Imagine two pipes, running side by side, but with fluids flowing in opposite directions. One pipe, it has hot fluid, the other cold. And as they flow, heat transfers from the hot one to the cold one.
Okay, I get that. But what does that have to do with filtering waste in my kidneys?
Well, instead of heat, we're talking about the concentration of salts and other solutes in the filtrate. So the descending limb of the loop of Henle, it allows water to pass out. So that concentrates the filtrate. Then, as the filtrate travels back up the ascending limb, salts are actively pumped out.
So it's like a cleverly designed system for manipulating the concentration gradient. What's the purpose of all that?
That gradient is key to the kidney's ability to conserve water. By creating this salty environment in the surrounding tissue, the kidney can draw out even more water from the filtrate, and that results in super concentrated urine.
So it's all about efficiency, making sure we don't lose more water than we have to. Makes sense, especially when you think about animals living in different environments.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of excretion, the different types of nitrogenous waste that animals produce. It's not just about filtering, it's also about what form the waste takes.
Hold on. There's more than one type of pee.
Well, not exactly pee in every case, but there are three main types of nitrogenous waste: ammonia, urea, and uric acid. And each one has its own advantages and disadvantages in terms of toxicity and the amount of water needed to get rid of it.
So it's a trade-off between how toxic the waste is and how much water you got to use to flush it out. What are the advantages of each type?
Okay, so for aquatic creatures like fish, ammonia is the simplest and most energy-efficient way to go.
Okay.
It's highly toxic, yes, but it dissolves really easily in water, so they can just flush it right out.
Yeah, makes sense. They're surrounded by water, so dilution's not a problem.
Yeah.
But what about land animals, like us? We can't exactly be peeing ammonia everywhere.
Right. For mammals, ammonia gets converted into urea in the liver. It's less toxic and doesn't need as much water to excrete. So it's a good compromise for us land dwellers.
Okay, so we're team urea. What about the other option? You mentioned uric acid.
Right, so uric acid, that's the least toxic, and it needs the least amount of water to get rid of. It's
Mhm.
actually excreted as a semi-solid paste.
A paste.
Yeah, which is perfect for animals that lay eggs, like birds and reptiles.
Ah, I see. You wouldn't want your eggs sitting in a puddle of toxic liquid.
Exactly. Uric acid lets them package the waste nice and efficiently inside the egg without harming the developing embryo.
Wow, nature really does have a solution for everything. So we've talked about kidneys and different types of waste, but what about the rest of the animal kingdom? Do all creatures have kidneys?
Not at all. Actually, there's an amazing amount of diversity when it comes to excretory structures in the animal kingdom.
Oh, all right. I'm ready for a whirlwind tour of weird and wonderful excretion. Give me some examples.
Okay, well, flatworms. They have these fascinating structures called flame cells. They filter waste from their body fluids. And get this, they actually kind of flicker, like tiny little candles.
Flame cells. That sounds almost poetic.
Mm-hmm.
What about insects? They're always a good source of strangeness.
Insects have these things called Malpighian tubules. They're these intricate networks of tubes that branch out throughout their whole bodies, collecting waste and delivering it to the gut to be excreted.
So they basically poop out their nitrogenous waste. Talk about efficiency.
Indeed. And speaking of efficiency, crustaceans. So your crabs and lobsters, they got green glands. And these glands filter waste from their blood and expel it through pores near their antenna.
Green glands. It's like they have tiny sewage treatment plants in their heads. Okay, all this is incredible, but I have to admit, I'm still kind of partial to our own human excretory system.
I get it. It's a remarkable piece of biological engineering, with all these different organs working together to keep us clean and in balance.
Speaking of our human plumbing, we've talked a lot about kidneys, but where does all that filtered waste go from there?
So from the kidneys, urine travels down two thin tubes called ureters to the bladder, and that acts as a storage tank.
Right, the bladder. It's like a holding tank with an on-demand release valve, but there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Oh, yeah. The bladder walls are lined with muscles that stretch as it fills, and then they contract to expel urine. And that whole process is carefully regulated by nerves and hormones, making sure things flow smoothly, or don't flow when they shouldn't.
Which I'm super grateful for. But back to the kidneys for a sec. You mentioned there's a mechanism for regulating how much blood gets filtered. How's that work?
Right, so that's the job of the juxtaglomerular apparatus, or JGA for short.
Catchy.
Yeah, it's this specialized region where the distal convoluted tubule, that's the last section of the renal tubule, meets the afferent arteriole. That's what supplies blood to the glomerulus.
Okay, so it's like a checkpoint between the blood supply and the filtering unit.
Yeah.
What happens there?
So the JGA's job is to maintain a steady glomerular filtration rate, GFR, even when blood pressure goes up and down. So if the GFR drops, it releases a hormone called renin.
Renin, that sounds familiar. Isn't that part of the blood pressure regulation system?
It is. Renin kicks off this chain reaction known as the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system.
Whoa, that's a mouthful. What does this system actually do?
So basically, it's this multi-step process that ultimately leads to increased water and salt reabsorption in the kidneys. And this boosts blood volume and pressure, which brings the GFR back to normal.
It's like a feedback loop. Low GFR triggers a cascade of events that raises blood pressure and restores the filtration rate. Pretty clever. But I thought we were talking about excretion, not blood pressure.
Well, it's all connected. You see, maintaining a stable internal environment, we call that homeostasis, that's crucial for survival. And that means balancing fluid levels, blood pressure, and waste removal. All of it.
So the kidneys are multitasking masters. It's amazing how everything is interconnected. But wait, are the kidneys the only organs involved in excretion? Seems like a big job for just one organ.
You're right. The kidneys are the stars, but they do have a supporting cast. Other organs play important roles in getting rid of waste, too.
Oh, like an ensemble cast. Tell me more.
For instance, your lungs. They're constantly expelling carbon dioxide and water vapor, which are byproducts of cellular respiration.
Right, breathing out isn't just about getting oxygen in, it's also about getting waste out.
Exactly. And then you've got the liver. It processes all sorts of substances, including bilirubin, which is a breakdown product of red blood cells, and it sends those to the butt to be eliminated.
So our poop isn't just undigested food. It's also carrying other types of waste.
Precisely. And then, let's not forget the skin. That releases sweat and sebum, oily substances that have small amounts of waste products in them.
So it turns out we're basically leaky waste processing factories. It's incredible how our bodies are constantly working to keep everything running smoothly. But what happens when things go wrong? What if our kidneys can't do their job properly?
That's a great question, and that leads us into the realm of kidney disorders, which can be quite serious.
Okay, I'm ready for a dose of reality. What are some common kidney problems, and how are they treated?
One of the most serious is kidney failure, where the kidneys just lose their ability to filter waste effectively. And that leads to a buildup of toxins in the blood, which we call uremia.
Yikes, that sounds dangerous. What can be done in those cases?
Well, thankfully, we've got some life-saving interventions available, like dialysis.
Dialysis. I've heard the term, but I've never really understood how it works.
It basically acts as an artificial kidney, filtering the blood externally. So think of it as a blood cleaning machine. The blood gets pumped through a machine that has a special membrane. And that membrane lets waste products diffuse out, but it holds on to those essential blood components. It's pretty remarkable, but it does mean patients have to be hooked up to a machine for several hours, multiple times a week.
Wow, that's intense. Are there any other options for people with kidney failure?
Yeah, there's a more permanent solution, a kidney transplant.
So replacing the faulty kidneys with a healthy one. That makes sense. But I imagine it's a pretty complex procedure.
It is. It involves major surgery, and it requires a suitable donor, often a close relative. That's to minimize the risk of rejection by the recipient's immune system.
Wow, it's truly amazing how far medical science has come in treating such complex conditions.
It really is. And even though kidney disorders can be pretty daunting, understanding how our bodies work and what can go wrong, that's the first step towards prevention and seeking timely treatment.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our health.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of knowledge, I think it's time for us to shift gears and delve into another fascinating aspect of excretion.
Oh, what else is there to explore in this wonderfully waste-filled world?
Well, we've talked a lot about how animals get rid of waste right now,
Yeah.
but what about regulating the balance of water and salts in the body? That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
Ooh, now you're talking. This is exactly the kind of deep dive I love.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we can learn from something as seemingly mundane as excretion.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that even the most basic biological processes are incredibly complex and fascinating when you really, dig into them.
Well said. I'm already eager to learn more about this water and salt balancing act. But for now, let's give our listeners a moment to digest all this incredible information. We'll be back soon to explore the intricate world of water and salt regulation. Stay with us. Welcome back. So before we went on our little mental digestion break, we were talking about how important it is for animals to maintain the right balance of water and salts in their bodies. It sounds like a pretty delicate balancing act.
It really is. Maintaining that balance, what we call electrolyte balance, it's just as crucial as getting rid of waste. You have too much water, your cells swell up, they can even burst. Too little, and they shrivel up. And electrolytes, well, they're vital for everything,
Yes.
From how our nerves function to muscle contractions.
Right, so it's all about hitting that sweet spot, the just right balance for everything to work properly. But how do animals actually do that? I mean, I'm guessing it's more complicated than just, drinking when you're thirsty.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's this complex interplay of behavior. You've got physiological mechanisms and even specialized organs all working together.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's start with behavior. What are some ways that animals change their behavior to regulate their water and salt balance?
Well, I mean, the most obvious example is seeking out water sources when they're thirsty. This could involve, migrating long distances, digging wells, even licking dew off leaves.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those documentaries with the elephants digging wells in dry riverbeds. It's amazing how they just instinctively know where to find water.
It really is remarkable. And in those environments where water is really scarce, animals have developed all sorts of ingenious strategies to conserve water. Like some desert rodents, they get most of their moisture from the food they eat, and they produce this super concentrated urine to minimize how much water they lose.
Wow, fascinating. So it's not just about finding water, it's also about making sure you don't lose too much. What about those physiological mechanisms you mentioned? What's going on inside the body to maintain this balance?
Well, one of the key players here is the kidney. which we've already talked about a bit. Remember the loop of Henle and how it helps concentrate urine?
Yeah, that incredible countercurrent mechanism that creates a salty environment in the kidney and draws water out of the filtrate.
Exactly. And the length of that loop of Henle actually varies depending on the animal's environment. Animals that live in dry habitats, they tend to have longer loops, which lets them produce even more concentrated urine, conserve that precious water.
So it's like the loop of Henle is fine-tuned through evolution, to adapt to the specific challenges of each environment. Amazing. But what about hormones? Do they play a role in a water and salt balance too?
Absolutely. In fact, remember that renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system we talked about earlier, the one that kicks in when blood pressure drops?
Yeah, the one that leads to increased water and salt reabsorption in the kidneys.
Right. Well, that system, it's not just about blood pressure. It's also crucial for regulating overall fluid balance. When your body senses low blood volume or low sodium levels, it triggers the release of aldosterone.
Aldosterone.
Yeah, and this hormone acts on the kidneys and tells them to reabsorb more sodium.
And since water follows sodium, that helps to restore both blood volume and electrolyte balance. It's like a 2-for-1 deal.
Exactly. And there's another hormone that's a real star when it comes to water regulation, antidiuretic hormone, or ADH.
Oh, ADH. I've heard of that one. Doesn't it have something to do with like making you pee less?
You got it. ADH is released by the pituitary gland when you're dehydrated or when your blood osmolarity increases. That basically means the concentration of solutes in the blood is too high.
So when I'm dehydrated, my brain is like, hey, hold on to that water. And ADH is the messenger that carries out the orders.
Precisely. ADH goes to the kidneys and tells those collecting ducts to be more permeable to water. So more water gets reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, you get less urine, and it's more concentrated.
So it's like switching the kidneys into like water-saving mode. I love how all these systems work together, to keep everything balanced. But what about animals that live in really extreme environments, like the ocean? They face a whole different set of challenges, right?
They do. Marine animals, especially those in saltwater, they're constantly battling osmotic pressure.
Okay, hold on. You're going to have to explain that one. What is osmotic pressure, and why is it a problem for marine animals?
Think of osmosis as water trying to even things out. It's the movement of water across a membrane from a low solute concentration to a high solute concentration.
The water moves to wherever there's more salt to try to dilute it.
Exactly. And seawater, well, it's much saltier than the internal fluids of most marine animals. So that means water is constantly trying to leave their bodies through osmosis, so they're at risk of dehydration.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. How do they cope with that constant water loss?
Well, they've developed some pretty incredible adaptations. Bony fish, for instance, they actually drink large amounts of seawater, to replace the water they're losing through osmosis.
Wait, hold on. They drink salt water. Wouldn't that just make them thirstier?
It would for us. But bony fish have these specialized cells in their gills that actively pump out the excess salt.
So they drink the salt water, take the water they need, and then get rid of the extra salt. That's amazing.
It really is. And sharks and rays, they have a different strategy. Instead of pumping out salts, they keep urea in their blood, so that raises their internal osmolarity to match the seawater.
So they make their blood as salty as the ocean around them. Wow, clever.
It is. It just goes to show the amazing diversity of solutions that evolution has come up with to solve these challenges of water and salt balance.
I'm just blown away by the sheer adaptability of life. From those desert rodents conserving every little drop of water to those marine fish manipulating their salt concentrations. It's clear that excretion is about way more than just getting rid of waste.
Absolutely. It's this fundamental process that's intricately connected to survival, to adaptation, to the delicate balance of life itself.
Well said. You know what? I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating topic. I'm already thinking about the specific adaptations of different animals, like how do camels survive in the desert? Or how do seabirds manage to drink salt water?
Excellent examples. Each one tells a fascinating story of evolutionary ingenuity.
I'm sensing another deep dive brewing. But before we get carried away, let's take a moment to recap what we've covered today and give our listener a moment to reflect.
Sounds good to me. So today we explored this intricate world of water and salt balance, looking at the roles of behavior, physiology, hormones, all in maintaining that delicate equilibrium. And of course, we marveled at the amazing adaptations of animals living in those extreme environments.
It's been an eye-opening journey for sure. But before we wrap up this section, I want to leave our listener with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Ooh, I do love a good thought-provoking question. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've talked a lot about how animals get rid of waste and keep their water and salt levels balanced. But what about the other side of the equation? How do they obtain the water and nutrients they need in the first place?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. That opens up a whole new world of exploration, from the different feeding strategies that animals use to the intricate processes of digestion and absorption. I can already feel another deep dive coming on.
I think you're right. But for now, we'll have to leave our listener with that tantalizing thought. We'll be back soon to finish up our deep dive into the world of animal excretion. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into animal excretion. So far, we've covered how creatures get rid of nitrogenous waste, the challenges of water and salt balance, and all those incredible adaptations that help animals thrive, even in crazy environments.
It really makes you appreciate the variety of strategies, right? All these different ways that have evolved for something as basic as excretion.
Yeah, it's amazing. From those tiny flickering flame cells and in flatworms to our own complex kidney filtration system, nature has come up with some seriously ingenious solutions.
It's a perfect example of form-following function. The excretory systems in different animals, they're perfectly suited to their environments and how they live.
Exactly. And we can't forget those hormones working behind the scenes, always making sure that water and salt balance is maintained. It's like a finely tuned orchestra, every instrument playing its part to create this harmonious whole.
Speaking of finely tuned systems, I think it's time we took a closer look at the human excretory system, all the key players involved.
Okay, I'm ready for a grand tour of our internal waste processing plant. We've already spent quite a bit of time on the kidneys. What about those other organs that help get rid of waste?
Right. So as we mentioned before, the lungs are vital for expelling carbon dioxide, that byproduct of cellular respiration. And the liver, well, it's a real busy processing center, breaking down all kinds of substances, like bilirubin from old red blood cells. And then it sends them to the gut for elimination.
So every time we exhale, every time we poop, we're excreting. Really highlights how interconnected all our bodily systems are.
Exactly. And don't forget the skin, which excretes sweat and sebum. Those oily substances that also have some waste products in them?
It's kind of wild to think that we're constantly getting rid of waste, even when we don't even realize it. Good thing we have showers, huh?
For sure. But on a more serious note, it's important to remember that this complex and wonderful excretory system, it's also pretty delicate. Any disruptions to its balance can have some serious consequences.
That's a bit sobering. What kind of things can go wrong, and what can we do to keep our excretory systems healthy?
Well, as we talked about before, kidney failure is a major concern, often requires dialysis or even a transplant. Other common problems, you've got urinary tract infections, kidney stones, and then bladder control issues.
Yeah, none of those sound fun. What are some ways we can prevent those kinds of problems from developing?
Staying hydrated is absolutely key. Drinking plenty of water, it helps flush out toxins, and it can help prevent those pesky kidney stones from forming. A healthy diet's also super important. Low in sodium, not too many processed foods. That's good for keeping your kidneys healthy.
So a lot of the same advice for overall health also applies to our excretory systems. Eat well, stay hydrated, your body will thank you.
Exactly. Taking care of your body means taking care of your kidneys, your lungs, your liver, your skin, all those key players in the waste removal game.
Well said. I feel like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from those microscopic details of the filtration units in the kidneys to the incredible diversity of excretory systems across the animal kingdom.
It's been quite the journey, and I hope you, our listener, have come away with a new appreciation for this often overlooked but essential world of animal excretion.
I know I have. It's amazing to realize just how complex and crucial this whole process is for life, something we often just take for granted.
It's a good reminder that even the most seemingly mundane parts of biology can be full of wonder and complexity.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of animal excretion. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay curious.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep discovering this incredible world around you.